Okay, this is art and rulers and art and war, those major themes. You can see how rulers often get us into war or lead us through war. If you're following gateways, this is units 4.6 and 4.7 combined. Look at rulers. The lady is Catherine the Great, the one of the two, I think, Tsarinas of Russia. Here she is in all of her splendor with all the crown, the scepter, the orb, those emblems of state and power and wealth. I'm sure the artist portrayed her in her best possible light, wearing full satins and, of course, the purple and gold and ermine that are symbols of, at least in the West and in Russia, of royalty. The gentleman, of course, is King Henry VIII of England, the man who lived in infamy with his 6 wives. He is shown here in full regalia, fully frontal as well. This is often a stance of power and authority. When you see a ruler or a wealthy person in this sort of stance, fully frontal, that's meant to give you an air of authority and power. He's got all of those gold gilding on. I'm sure the cloth that he's wearing is actually real gold, showing him to be a prosperous king, a powerful king, and a very wealthy one. This is a portrait of Napoleon Bonaparte by Jacques-Louis David. Here he's shown as the military leader that he was, a great one, on the full diagonal. Notice all the horse, the cloak, the arm, everything is on that diagonal, so it conveys that movement, that man of action that he wanted to be portrayed here. He's leading his troops to victory. Ah, yes. This photo is the portrait of Mao Zedong. The portrait still hangs there today. Mao Zedong was the leader of the Communist Revolution in China. And he has got his portrait over the old Imperial Palace gates. These are the gates to the Forbidden City. It's called forbidden because when the emperors were in power, no one was allowed, no commoner was allowed to pass the gates. It's basically a huge complex in the middle of Beijing, refurbished for the 2008 Olympics, and Mao's portrait hangs there on purpose. He's sort of putting his stamp and literally claiming his mastery over the imperial rule. Sort of saying, this will never be again. Communism is here to stay. I am here to stay. I am literally putting my foot down over the emperor and the old imperial ways. Okay. So art and war. Sometimes they're simply documenting what happens in a battle or a war. Sometimes they're talking about victorious scenes or heroic scenes. And sometimes they're talking about the consequences of war. Ah, this is one. This is in response to World War I. This is Otto Dix's The War. Dix actually served in the German army during World War I. And if you know anything about World War I warfare, it was the war of trench warfare, where soldiers on opposing sides dug huge trenches in the ground, long, miles long, up and down whole country borders between France and Germany especially. And basically the soldiers, to gain ground, had to hopscotch their way as the other side of the soldiers in their trenches shot at you or lobbed bombs at you. This was the era of mustard gas, lobbing bombs, and the invention of the machine gun. So when you poked your head up over the top of that trench to scramble over to the next trench to try to gain 5 feet of ground, you probably had to cross through barbed wire, and of course all of that machine gun fire and lobbing of bombs. Needless to say, this was just brutal. It was gory. So Otto Dix is showing us what happened during for the common soldier during World War I. On the far left panel, we see the soldiers entering the fray. So we've got a story being told in time here. In the middle main panel, we have the sharp contrast and gore and detail of the actual battle scene. Soldiers' skeletons impaled on wire, shot up with machine gun fire, rotting, and just complete devastation. On the far right panel, we see the soldiers sort of almost like ghosts of themselves as they drag themselves and their compatriots off the field of battle. And in the very bottom panel, we have the dead soldiers entombed, lined up like just so much cordwood. Yes, this was not a pro-war piece. Dix took its inspiration from this work here. This is Grunwald, the Eisenheim altarpiece. This went into a chapel during the Renaissance in the north. This was in Germany, I believe. No, here it's in France, but it was in Germany, in Eisenheim. And the chapel served in a hospital for patients who suffered from chronic skin diseases that were disfiguring and painful. And so this altarpiece would have stood on the altar, and it would have been opened and closed in between service. Okay. We have here a crucifixion. On the far right panel, we have got Saint Sebastian being impaled with arrows. In the middle scene, the main scene, we have Christ being crucified. And we see it in all its torturous sort of gore, with the twisted arms, splayed fingers, the emaciated greenish skin that's even beginning to peel away. If you ever see this piece up close, the skin is beginning to peel away. He looks tortured and dead. And as the Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary and others swoon at his feet. At the bottom of his feet, we've got, you see a little lamb there. And it's around his hoof, he's arched, he's holding a crucifix and also sort of touching the chalice. That's the first time that symbolism has been shown in Western art. This is Christ being sacrificed, the Lamb of God. Here, Christ is the sacrifice for humanity. Okay? And it's symbolized and portrayed here not only in the portrayal of Christ, but in the Lamb being present. On the right, I believe that's St. Anthony. Below is where we see Christ being entombed. Now, this went up in a hospital for people who suffered skin diseases, who are all Catholics, of course, and they're all been praying at church looking at this piece. And when they look at the Christ, they know that he knows their suffering because we see it painted on his skin. And we are remembering his suffering. So the parishioner and the Christ are sort of having an empathetic, sympathetic exchange of feeling and acknowledgement of each other's pain. But in this piece, the Grunwald Eisenheim piece, Christ is the fact sacrifice. In Dix's work, the war, this World War I soldiers are the sacrifice.